The year is 1271, and you are a young merchant in the great city of Constantinople. You have heard stories about the riches to be made trading in the East, but the journey is long and fraught with danger. Who would go on such a trip? Well, perhaps you might, if you knew there was an inn halfway along the route where you could rest up, out, trade with other merchants, and even find some beautiful silk to sell back in Constantinople. In fact, maybe it was this very inn that inspired the name of this entire network of trade routes, Silk Road. The Silk Road was the world's first global trade network, linking east to west, north to south, across some of the largest empires in history. For over 1,500 years, this network of routes facilitated cultural and economic exchange between the farthest reaches of Eurasia. But how did it come to be, and what was life like for the merchants who traveled its length and breadth? Let's find out. We begin our tale in China during the Han Dynasty. For decades, the Chinese had been manufacturing fine silk out of cocoons produced by the humble silkworm. This product had become so prized that merchants risked their lives traveling from the Chinese heartland to Central Asia to sell it. But these merchants were not just intrepid traders, they were ambassadors of the empire. The Chinese state had established formal diplomatic relations with various Central Asian city-states and used these merchants as a means of projecting power abroad. One such state was Fergana, a kingdom located near the western end of the Tarim Basin and home to many merchants of the region. In 104 BC, a delegation led by Gan Ying, a Chinese ambassador, arrived in Fergana, seeking to buy horses for the vast armies of the Han. When the local king heard that they had come from the great Emperor Wu of Han, he rolled out the red carpet for them and sent them on their way back home with a sizable purchase and 2 extra men who would serve as guides for any future travelers. And that is exactly what Gan Ying did. He returned to Chang'an, the capital of Han, and told the emperor all about the wealth and culture of the kingdoms he had seen on his way. And more importantly, he told him about the wealth to be made selling Chinese silk in the West. As it turned out, Emperor Wu listened, and in 101 BC, he sent a mission to Fergana to set up a permanent diplomatic mission. It was headed by Zhang Qian, who became the first person to travel the entire length of the Silk Road and lay the foundation for centuries of trade to come. But this is not to say that trade immediately sprang up between the Han and the Forganians. For the next century or so, relations between the two states were strained due to border conflicts and civil war within China. It was until 830 BC that things settled down once again, and the groundwork was laid for a massive increase in trade along the Silk Road. By this time, the Silk Road had expanded into a network of multiple routes connecting cities along the way, forming a kind of relay system. Along these routes were established inns, post houses, and resting stops where merchants could refresh themselves, their animals, and even swap goods along the way. Due to the introduction of Buddhism into China, many of these inns and resting stops were often built by monasteries, which served as centers of learning and culture along the road. Some of the most famous examples include the Mogao Caves, Dunhuang, and the Bezeklik Thousand Buddha Caves. These sites played an important role in disseminating Buddhist scriptures and art throughout the network. But what was the actual flow of goods along the Silk Road? We know that Chinese silk was a prized commodity in the West, as well as glassware, porcelain, cotton, and tea. In exchange, the Chinese got precious metals, wool, ivory, and grapes, among many other things. But while the eastern terminus of the Silk Road can be pinpointed pretty easily, the same cannot be said for the West. The Romans knew about the Silk Road, but it's unlikely that they ever traded directly with China. Instead, their goods most likely passed through the Parthian Empire before ending up in the hands of middlemen who brought them further west. From there, merchants would have traveled along a variety of routes to get to their final destination, depending on the season and availability of goods. Some would have traveled along the northern route through Central Asia and Iran, while others would have preferred the southern route through India and Mesopotamia. Both routes would have led them to the Mediterranean, where their wares would be sold in the markets of Alexandria, Antioch, and eventually Rome itself. It's worth noting that the Silk Road was not just about trade, it was also about ideas. As merchants traveled from city to city, they would have brought with them news of the outside world. New technologies, art, and culture, all of which would help shape the societies they visited. For example, The spread of Buddhism from India to China can in part be attributed to the Silk Road and the merchants who traveled it. But as we mentioned earlier, there were dangers to be found along the Silk Road. Bandits, rival armies, and harsh weather conditions all posed a threat to merchants and their goods. That's why many of them chose to travel in groups, either on foot or on horseback, with elephants being used for carrying heavy loads. The journey could take months, so travelers would often have to camp out in the open or in makeshift shelters along the way. But the rewards could be great for those who made it to the end of the road. As the Roman Empire grew in wealth and power, so too did the demand for exotic goods from the East. Merchants who brought silk, spices, and other commodities to Rome could make a fortune. However, as the empire declined in the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, the Silk Road also suffered. With less wealth and stability in the West, the flow of goods along the trade route slowed to a trickle. Despite this, trade continued in a limited way through Central Asia and into China. During this period, the Mongols were rising to power in the steppes, and they would soon unite under the banner of Genghis Khan. Once the Mongols had conquered much of Central Asia, they established their own postal relay system along the Silk Road to facilitate trade and communication across their vast empire. Under the Pax Mongolica, the Silk Road experienced a brief revival as merchants from China, Persia, and Europe traveled freely through the Mongol domains. Marco Polo's journey to China in the 13th century is a famous example of this. But when the Mongol Empire began to decline in the 14th century, the Silk Road fell into disuse. By this time, European merchants had found alternative sources of silk and other luxury goods, and the trade routes across Central Asia became increasingly dangerous. The Silk Road was not a single road, rather a series of interconnected routes that spanned over 4,000 miles, linked together some of the largest and most powerful empires in history, including the Han, Roman, Kushan, and Mongol. Along its length, merchants traded not just in goods, but also in ideas and culture. While the Silk Road eventually fell into disuse, its legacy lived on. The goods and ideas that flowed across the network helped shape the societies of both East and West. So the next time you look at a piece of silk or sip a cup of tea, remember that they may have traveled along the Silk Road before reaching you. The Silk Road wasn't just about goods. It was about ideas, cultures, and connections that shaped the world as we know it. If this journey across time and trade inspired you, drop a like and comment with your favorite Silk Road fact or location. Don't forget to subscribe to HistoroMystic for more epic timelines, forgotten roots, and stories that connect us all. Did you enjoy this episode? And be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes on HistoroMystic. And if you want to learn more about the Silk Road, then check out the resources in the description below. Until next time, thanks for watching.